pals, I'm here today to talk about my favourite reads of 2020. I'm a bit behind with this video. It should have come out a few weeks ago, but I've just been a bit unorganised this month with getting videos together, so I hope you are okay with the delay. And hopefully I'll get, back into gear and upload a couple of times every week. That is the plan. So, I think I have 16 books to talk about. For the first time in 8 years, where I've been doing the channel, I've actually ranked these books. I've done a favourite books video every year and I've never attempted to rank them, and I've seen more and more people do it, and every time I saw someone do it I was like, there's no way I can ever do that, absolutely no way. And then yesterday I sat down and wrote down these books and I thought, I probably could, for some of these. And I will admit, there's an area where I've ranked them where it's pretty grey, like how I would feel differently on another day would probably switch some of those books around. But the top 3 are definitely right, and I feel good about where they are placed. And I just wanted to talk about these books anyway, and hope that you pick them up, regardless of where they are in the list. Now, I'm super stingy with my 5-star ratings, so I read 114 books last year. I think I DNF'd around 35, and I only gave 7 5 stars. To me, a 5-star read is a book that's made it to my new favourites. A 4.5-star read is super strong. There might be one tiny thing that niggled me, or it just didn't feel as powerful or impactful as the books I gave 5 stars, but I still would 100% reread them, and I'm keeping all these books. Some of them I audiobooked or borrowed from the library, so I want to get my own copies so I can reread them in the future. Just a side note, I'm in a really chatty mood today, by the way. My ultimate goal is to be able to regularly reread my favourite books. When I was a child and a teenager, I reread so much. I didn't have a single book that was a favourite that I hadn't read more than 10 times. I was a massive rereader and I loved it. And having so many books, I find, means that you have this guilt about rereading, and so you don't reread. And I've started rereading more in the last couple of years and really loved it. And so as part of me wanting to reduce my physical TBR, the ultimate aim is to be able to, in 2022, to reread my favourite books from 2020. So always reread my favourite books from 2 years previous, so I can revisit them and, and just re-enjoy those experiences. That is the ultimate aim. So the first book I want to mention, number 16, is the only book on this list that I gave 4 stars and not 4.5 or 5, but I decided to include it because I read it in January, it stuck with me all year, it felt really important to me, and I referenced it a lot throughout the year and recommended it to a lot of people. And that is What My Mother and I Don't Talk About, 15 Writers Break the Silence, edited by Filgate. So this is an essay collection that has 15 different writers in it, and they're all talking about their relationship with their mother. All of those relationships are complicated. A couple of them are good relationships, but the vast majority are not good and are very fraught with things that happened in the past that haven't been dealt with, or things that are happening in the present that mean that the child and parent no longer speak and are estranged from one another. I'm super nosy. I love hearing people's stories. I'm one of those people who absolutely loves when I meet somebody new being like, what time do you get up in the morning? What sort of thing do you have for breakfast? When you go home in the evening, what do you do? You've got 5 hours, what do you spend those 5 hours doing? What time do you go to bed? I find it fascinating. And I find people's family dynamics even more fascinating. I moved in with my partner's family for a year after university until we managed to get money together to move out together. And living with a different family to your own is so interesting because it makes you realise the things your family do that aren't what everyone else does, like keep tomato sauce and bread in the fridge, which Johnny hates, but I love because I was raised to do that. And just loads of weird and wonderful things. And so I'm super nosy, and I find people's relationships with their parents in particular fascinating because I have a very complicated, let's say, relationship with my dad. I don't see him very much at all and don't speak to him very much at all. And there's a lot of complicated feelings around that which I'll probably never be able to work through. And so I loved this essay collection. I gave it 4 stars because ultimately 15 different writers, you're not going to love all their writing styles, they're not all going to speak to you, but I felt that at least 10 of these were really profound, beautifully written, exploring really interesting themes, and I found so many writers in the collection who I then wanted to go and read more work by them. So I highly recommend it. I think I would love to read more, essay collections, anthologies with different writers that are as strong as this one. So please give me recommendations. I would love to read more books like this one. And then number 15 on the list is When the Lights Go Out by Carys Bray. I have read all of Carys Bray's books. I just love her writing style. And I just really enjoyed this. And I'm well aware that a lot of people will read this book and think, yeah, that's good, but it's not going to be one I really remember. But she's one of those writers who I just find so much comfort in the way she deals with family dynamics. So this is about a family who are living in a world that's pretty much ours, but climate change is a bit worse. There's lots of flooding, and the husband in the family becomes obsessed with it and the idea of surviving climate change. And he starts to sort of prepare for the end of the world, whilst the wife is trying to keep the family together and prepare for Christmas. It's a very small, focused family drama. There's lots of, you know, really beautiful scenes as the sons talk to their mother, and the mother-in-law gets involved. I just really love the way Carys Bray writes families. I could see everything about their house and their garden and the way they moved through rooms. And this one is just filled with beautiful commentary. I don't think it's her best novel. In fact, I think both her other novels are better than this. But I still really enjoyed it. And I think if you enjoy Carys Bray, Joanna Cannon, Kit de Wyld, you should read this and you will probably love it as well. And number 14 on the list is another one I read right at the end of the year, and that's Frying Plantain by Zalika Benta. This is a glorious short story collection. This is a short story collection that's sort of a novel as well. We're following the life of a young girl. She's growing up in Little Jamaica in Toronto's Eglinton West neighbourhood. Yes. And she's being raised by her single mother, and every summer she goes home to Jamaica to see her family. And she doesn't feel Jamaican enough when she's in Canada, because a lot of the Jamaican children she knows grew up in Jamaica, and so they have a stronger accent than her, so she gets picked on for that. Then she has a group of friends when she's around 11 who bully her quite viciously. That's so perfectly pitched. It made me feel like I was 11 years old again, and not knowing what to do and how to escape so-called friends who bullied you. It was perfectly written and really emotive, I felt. And then we follow her as she becomes a woman, basically, and the fraught relationship she has with her nationality, but also with the conflict with her mother, thinking she should be raised in quite a strict way that reflects her Jamaican upbringing, whilst not living in Jamaica and having to deal with the fact that, you know, the Canadians around her don't live with such strict rules. I thought this was beautiful. The exploration of the relationship between these women, you know, we have the daughter, the mother and the grandmother, is wonderful, and I loved it. I'd highly recommend this one. This next one I obviously bought thinking I would enjoy it, but then I was a bit unsure when I started it whether I would, and I ended up loving this. I think it is so intelligent and brilliantly crafted. I can't help but feel like she must be so super smart to have been able to put the book together like this. And that is The Atlas of Reds and Blues by Devi S. Laskar. This follows an American-born daughter to Bengali immigrant parents, and the novel opens with her lying, bleeding to death on her driveway after she's been shot by the police. We don't know why she's been shot, we don't know what's happening, and the rest of the novel is told in vignettes, completely non-chronologically, following this woman's life. She's never named, none of her family are ever named, and she references herself based on what she represents in that vignette. So if she's talking about her parents, she is daughter. If she's talking about her children, she's mother. And if she's talking about her husband, she's white. There is excellent commentary here on racism in suburban America, what it's like for a person of colour to be married to a white person, and the privileges that white person may not realise they have when they do, and the everyday instances of racism which are impossible to navigate. This is beautiful. The writing style is really crisp. Every word feels perfectly placed, and yeah, I'd highly recommend this, and I've hardly seen anyone talk about it, so I would really love to see more people pick this one up. Then when I listened to an audio right at the start of the year is Eloquent Rage, A Black Woman Discovers Her Superpower by Brittney Cooper. This is excellent audio, and I definitely want to get this in a physical copy so I can read it and tab, because there's so much brilliant information. This is a collection of essays about rage in black women, and how the idea of rage has been used against black women, how she thinks that black women should embrace eloquent rage. They should be allowed to feel rage, because there's things to be angry about and not be told, well, you know, you're just an angry black woman then and we don't want to listen to you. The essays are brilliant, filled with discussions about what it's like to be a working class black woman and whether black men choose to date white women and have this idea of being inferior if they're in a relationship with a black woman. There's essays about Beyonce and her lyrics and what they mean, essays about the idea of embracing how beautiful you are as a black woman and embracing girlfriends and finding a group of women you can speak to about these things. It's excellent, and it's really hard because I want to recommend it on audio because she narrates it so brilliantly. You know, there's moments when she does sound really angry, there's moments when she describes things really warmly or with excellent humour. This is really funny whilst being really informative and awful. But I also want to recommend it in print because what she does that I love essay collections or non-fiction books like this that also include hard facts and statistics. I like when these things are backed up and they have references and you can go and look into those specific things and learn more, and this book is filled with that. She's obviously done her research, she's obviously incredibly intelligent and articulate, and I'd highly recommend this however you decide to read it. And then I have a memoir I also listened to on audio, and I definitely recommend this one on audio. It was fantastic and narrated by the author, and that is Sigh, Gone, a Misfits Memoir of Great Books, Punk Rock and the Fight to Fit In by Phuc Tran. This is a memoir about Phuc Tran's family moving to America. When he's around 5 years old, they flee Saigon as it's falling, and it's about his coming of age in America and everything that brings. This is beautiful. Each chapter opens with a book and he tries to read the canon, the American classics written by white people in order to like fully Americanise. The book opens with a description of American diners and burgers and like the jackets that jockeys wear, and it feels all American, and throughout the memoir you realise that Phuc Tran is desperately trying to fit in. He asks to take on a American name because he doesn't like his name. He has lots of conflicts with himself about how he comes across and the fact that he's one of only 2 Vietnamese students in his school. He has a really complicated relationship with his parents. His parents really struggle to speak English and he starts to lose the ability to speak to them in Vietnamese, and so they have a real language barrier. There's a brilliant and beautiful section of this book where he talks about the fact that he can't really have a relationship of any depth with his parents because of the inability to talk about complicated feelings because they're speaking different languages. And it's beautiful. He becomes a punk rocker because he decides rather than being an other for his race, he'll be an other for something that he chose. And it's about him embracing punk rock while embracing all the American classics and his movement through that, and what he comes to realise about himself, the fact that he has, you know, internalised racism and has awful feelings about his parents because of that. And it is a beautiful exploration of the immigrant experience, what it's like for a child who, you know, ends up feeling pretty distant from their parents because of it, and the decisions they make that they may later regret. This is absolutely beautiful. I highly recommend it on audio. So now we're up to the top 10, and you may be surprised to see this one at number 10. Some of you who watch my channel may expect to see this higher on the list, but I feel like this one didn't stick with me as much as the books that I have rated higher. I still really love this one, but I don't think it deserved to be any higher than number 10, and that is The Bass Rock by Evie Wyld. This is a beautiful book, and I think the only reason I am not putting this higher on the list is just because I think with some distance the ending isn't particularly strong, and so it just meant that it just didn't make it to like the top 5, which at the start of the year I definitely thought it would. So this does 2 things that I adore, or possibly 3. It is multi-POV, so there's 3 characters telling their story, and they're telling their story across 3 different timelines. I love both of those things, and all 3 of those characters are women, and the book is filled with commentary on the patriarchy and violence against women, and how whilst the way that is performed has changed through the ages, it is still happening now. So one of the stories I think is set in like the 1600s, and it's about a woman who is accused of being a witch. I think which is a storyline that I just feel is a bit weak and confused me at points. And the middle storyline is, I think, post-World War II. My favourite storyline, it felt very much like Sarah Waters. It's about a woman who is raising her two stepchildren, and her husband is awfully violent and controlling, and you're following her story. She's realising lots of things. And there's a story in present day where the granddaughter of the lady in the post-war period is going to clean out the house. And she has suffered PTSD, and she is trying to overcome that, and she meets a woman when she goes to the house who makes her think a lot more about the way women are treated in society. So this is thematically excellent, beautifully written, highly recommend it. So at number 9 we have another short story collection. This proves I need to read more short story collections. I hardly read any in 2020, but 2 of them have made it to my best books of the year. The next one is Heads of the Coloured People by Nafissa, Thompson, Spires. I absolutely loved this. So I am actually going to read a little bit from the blurb because I don't think I can do this justice by describing it myself. In this crackling debut collection, Nafissa Thompson Spires interrogates our supposedly post-racial era. To wicked and devastating effect, she exposes the violence, both external and self-inflicted, that threatens Black Americans no matter their apparent success. So this follows a group of middle-class Black Americans who are very successful. Like, a lot of them are working in research, they're academics or teachers, and all the stories except from the first and the last are pretty satirical. They're dark and twisted, but they're not too dark. And then the first and the last go further, and they're not really funny at all, they're just very sad. And the book being sandwiched by those 2 and then being filled with more funny stories that are still incredibly insightful and sharp makes you realise when you finish the book that, you know, all of the stories were devastating, even if they came across as humorous. As an example, one of the stories is a group of letters written between 2 mothers. Their daughters go to this private school and they're not getting on. There's some sort of accusation about one of them killing a hamster, and the mothers are writing letters to one another that are getting more and more ridiculous, and they're starting to include, like, basically their fucking resume to prove how professional they are in order to like make sure their daughter is the most popular. There's another one where a woman is contemplating suicide because she's not getting enough likes on her social media, and she's thinking about the fact that, you know, if I did this, how many likes would I get, how much interaction would I get, but then I wouldn't be alive to see it. It's like hilarious but also awful. So I loved this, and I feel like I can safely say I've never read another book like it. I can't compare her voice to anyone else's because it feels entirely her own. I'll read whatever she writes, and if you have read this and you feel like you've read other books, you know, like this with a similar tone, please recommend them to me because I really love this. Then at number 8 we have Silver Sparrow by Tayari Jones. I have the physical copy of this, but I actually listened to this one on audio. I highly recommend the audio, it's absolutely phenomenal. I think there was 2 narrators. I'm going to put their names along here because they definitely deserve a shout out. They're excellent. I really loved An American Marriage. I love this one even more. I think what I've realised after reading 2 of Tayari Jones' books is she does something which is one of my favourite things in fiction, and that is she gives you these characters who are complex and are not perfect people and have flaws, and through that character's eyes you see somebody else, and these characters are somehow entangled in one another's lives, and when you see it through one of the character's eyes you feel like they're not really at fault and the other person is, and then she flips the perspective and you realise that a situation you were sure you knew who was in the right or who was in the wrong, you suddenly don't know, and actually there's all these different things to consider. And it feels true to life, you know, when a friend asks you for advice and says, oh, this happened and I said this and they said this, you know, inevitably there's no one who's innocent here, right? There's no one who's totally guilty. Both people have been involved in a situation, both people have wronged, and both people have done good things. And she exposes that in all its beauty. So this is a novel about two sisters who don't, well, there's a man who's a bigamist. He has a wife who everybody knows about and a daughter with that wife who everybody knows about. But after marrying that woman, he very quickly married another woman and had a daughter with her, and they're his secret family. They know about the public family, but the public family do not know about them. And we start when the girls are growing up, they're becoming teenagers, they live in this same small town, and the secret daughter is being denied certain things because the father doesn't want her to meet her public daughter, or her public sister. So for example, she wants a summer job at a theme park, she can't because her sister wants a summer job. She wants to go to a certain private school, she can't because her sister's going there. She needs new clothes, she can't because he spent all his money on buying the sister new clothes. And the novel opens from the secret daughter's perspective and then it switches to the public daughter's perspective. And it is absolutely brilliant. Not only the commentary on the daughters, but the commentary on the father and his sort of foster brother and the two mothers is beautiful. You feel like you know the relationship the father has with the public wife, and you don't. And you find out so much more, and you're left at the end with these people who feel so alive, and yet you still wouldn't be able to decide like what should happen next and who wronged and how this could be resolved. It's phenomenal. None of her other books have been published in the UK, but I'm going to just have to get hold of them from the US because I think she's one of my favourite authors. I'd highly recommend this. And also she just writes beautifully about smells and textures and everything. Like you can completely see their hair and the clothes they're wearing and smell the food they're cooking and picture the rooms they're in. She's an incredibly, I think, tactile writer. So yeah, absolutely adore her. Definitely pick this one up. And it's just a really joyous read as well. Like, even though it's about a difficult subject, I got so much joy out of reading it. The next one is Homey by Danez Smith. I'm not going to talk about this one for very long because I don't read much poetry and I don't really know how to talk about poetry. I borrowed this collection from the library and I absolutely adored it. Because I don't read much poetry, what I actually did was I found a reading that was on YouTube where Danez Smith had read out from their book, I think probably like a third of the poems. It's a fairly long reading, so I watched that first and then I read the poems, and I found that really helpful because I'll link that video below, because I found that, you know, the poems that Danez had read, I knew the way they intended them to be read, I knew the rhythm, I knew the intonations, the emphasis, and then the poems they hadn't read, I knew the way Danez would have read them, the rhythm to them. This is beautiful. This is such a powerful and wonderful collection. It's one of those books where I read it in awe that anybody could possibly write like that, and I kept rereading sections and reading bits out loud to Johnny. It is glorious, and if you don't read poetry and you're scared of it like I am, then I highly recommend starting with Homey by Danez Smith, because I found it really approachable and filled with beautiful commentary that was understandable. I knew what was being said and I just loved it. Then completely different, and this is why I struggle with ranking these books, because how do you compare a memoir to a non-fiction that's dealing with a certain topic, to a middle grade fantasy, to a poetry collection? It's impossible, right? So on another day, you know, some of these books will be in a different order. But today, the next book is Hollowpox, The Hunt for Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. I read this towards the end of the year and I absolutely loved it. I got so much joy out of it. I'm not going to say much. It's the third book in a fantasy middle grade trilogy. It's my favourite of the three. I love the fact that this was focused on sort of magical animals. Like, as soon as animals are involved, I'm game. This is filled with so much joy and wonder. The descriptions of buildings and food and clothes and smells are glorious. I love the fact that in this one Morrigan starts to go to lessons. I always love like lessons in middle grade books, and yeah, I just thought this was absolutely wonderful, and I immediately started doing so much research into middle grade fantasy. I have a massive list that I want to try and get through this year. but do please let me know down below if you've read any middle grade fantasy that you would recommend. You know, it may be on the list, but it will bump up the list, or it may not be on the list and I can add it. I adored this and got so much joy out of it, and I highly recommend it. Number 5 is another book I listened to on audio, and that is Natives, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire by Akala. This is phenomenal. This does something I adore in non-fiction, and that is when a writer has elements of memoir, so they take you through their life, but they use the structure of their life to explore a subject. And this subject is the British Empire, and how the British Empire has affected the way we view race and class in Britain today. It is phenomenal. I listened to this one on audiobook because it was when I just wasn't feeling well enough to read physical books. And I loved hearing Akala narrate because he is phenomenal. Like, oh my god, just go and watch any talks he's done. He's one of those people who's so incredibly intelligent that he can be asked any question and immediately come up with a really articulate, thoughtful and informative response that doesn't sound like bullshit just to give an answer. Like, he knows the answer, he's so intelligent, and you can really tell that when he tells this story. The elements of memoir were beautiful. I loved hearing about his life and growing up and how he was treated at school because of his race, how he was expected to not perform well academically, and how he completely proved them wrong, and he's incredibly intelligent. And what I learned about the British Empire in this was devastating and also fascinating. And this is the book that really inspired me to want to learn more about the British Empire, which is something I mentioned in my 2021 goals video, which I'll link up here. I loved this. I did love it on audio, but I 100% want to reread this book, perhaps this year, because there's so much. If I was reading it physically, I would have tabbed and like gone and done more research. So on audio I just kept like rewinding and re-listening to certain bits because I was like, oh, I just want to make sure I like took that fact in. So I would recommend this on audio because he narrates it brilliantly, but I also think this would be an excellent book to read physically because you could, you know, pause and tab things. So yeah, I adored this one. At number 4, you're probably all thinking, if you watch my channel, where's this one? We have Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I fucking love this book. This is a historical fiction book that focuses on Shakespeare's family. Shakespeare is unnamed, and we open with his son, Hamnet, and it follows their story as you know that Hamnet will die. You know that's how this book will end, and you watch as the events of several days unfold as the plague comes into their village and Hamnet contracts it, and how that affects the family. But this is one of those historical fiction books that does something I love, in that whilst it follows this period of time before and after Hamlet's death, it also sort of reminisces. So it doesn't have sections saying, you know, a different date so you know you're earlier in time. It just reminisces about how Shakespeare and his wife met and what they were like as teenagers and how they built their life together. So you get the full story. And then following Hamlet's death, you see how that affects them both really differently, how that leads to Shakespeare writing Hamlet, and how his wife just doesn't realise the man she's married to, and how they're such different people. And I heard Maggie O'Farrell talk about this one, and she said something she really wanted to bring to the forefront is that a lot of scholars have said about Shakespeare, you know, he married a farmer's daughter. Obviously he's incredibly intelligent and can write beautifully, so why did he marry a woman who probably couldn't even read? You know, what's that about? And Maggie O'Farrell wanted to talk about the fact that actually Shakespeare came from quite a poor family himself, and yes, he became somebody who achieved status and success and riches, but at the time when they got married he wasn't, and actually she was the daughter of a very wealthy, very well respected farmer and landowner, and she was the catch. And Maggie O'Farrell decided to make Agnes, the wife, somebody who knew a lot about herbal remedies and almost bordered on being a witch, and she decided she wanted Agnes to sort of play the role of being Shakespeare's inspiration for the more magical elements to his plays. So I just love this. It's beautifully written. Just as a historical fiction book in and of itself, it's wonderful. But I just also love the commentary this has on women and marriage and families and grief. This is like incredibly sad. You know, if you have children, I think this would be really hard to read. So like, be warned, but it is excellent and well worth a read if you can bear it. And at number 3 we have a book that I think brought me the most joy throughout the year. This is just a wonderful, wonderful book. And I do feel like whilst a lot of the books I have on this list do deal with darker topics, a lot of them do that in a really warm and generous and joyous way. And this one really exemplifies that. And that is Mr. Loverman by Bernadine Evaristo. I listened to this on audio, so I'll put the audiobook narrator's name here because it's absolutely excellent. So in this we follow 74-year-old Barrington, Barry to his friends. He was Antiquan born and he came over to London during the Windrush generation, and he has lived in Hackney for many, many, many years. He is unhappily married and has been having a secret relationship with his childhood best friend since they were like 14 years old. So they've been having a secret love affair for 60 years, and this is excellent because, right, you love Barry. He is a phenomenal character. He's kind and generous and funny and thoughtful in so many ways, but he's also stubborn and arrogant and uninformed and homophobic. Like, as a queer man, he's homophobic. There's points in the book where he goes into queer spaces and he doesn't want to be near these gay men. He doesn't feel that he is the same as them. And there's also lots of commentary about the way he treats his wife Carmel. So there's sections of the book that are from her perspective, which are told in a different style. I love those sections. From his perspective, Carmel is awful, and then from her perspective you see how he is really, even as a gay man, he has really oppressed his wife. He really holds this patriarchal role in the family. He doesn't know how to do anything for himself, and she feels really trapped by him. And then there's lots of commentary on their relationship with their 2 daughters and what their 2 daughters represent about them. I love this book. Like, every single character, even like a tiny side character, was brilliantly described. And there's moments of such grief and tenderness, and also moments of such happiness. So I adored this and I'd highly recommend it. And then at number 2 we have Small Island by Andrea Levy. I also listened to this one on audio and I need to get myself a copy of it. Andrea Levy's books have been re-released in beautiful editions, and I'm scared to order any of her books online in case they send me the old ones, so I'm waiting until we can actually go back in bookshops to pick up Small Island and her other books, because I need to read all of her work now. So I actually read this book when I was 17. I'm now 30, and when I was 17 I had been reading adult fiction for about a year, 2 years, and I was still at a stage where I sort of struggled to pick them myself, and I was studying English literature, and I noticed that my teacher had a book on her desk. I sort of spied on the book as I was handing in an essay or something and noticed that it was Small Island, and it must have been the year that it had won the Women's Prize, because it was in paperback and it had just been released. And I read it and I remember absolutely loving it at the time. But on a reread I realised how much more I got out of it as the person I am today. You know, I was completely, you know, unaware, I think, of anything to do with the legacy of empire and racism and classism in the UK, anything to do with the Windrush generation. I just didn't know any of that. I didn't learn any of it at school. And, you know, I've picked up bits and pieces here and there over the 13 years since I read the book, and on a reread, this book just sang. Like, this book is glorious. So this is a historical fiction book, but it's told from the perspective of 4 different characters. Andrea Levy narrates them all, and she is phenomenal. I kept checking, being like, there must be more than one narrator, because how is she doing these Jamaican accents so brilliantly, and then this Yorkshire accent, and then this sort of posh, you know, Sussex accent. You know, I just couldn't understand that somebody could do those voices so perfectly, but she does. So in this story we follow a married couple who are coming over from Jamaica during the Windrush movement, and the husband has previously been in the UK because he joined the army and fought during the war, and he is bringing his wife over to join him, and she assumes when they get there it's all going to be wonderful and beautiful, and of course it isn't. London had survived the Blitz, it was in pieces, it was covered in rubble and dust, and people were poor, and rations were limited, and life was hard, especially for people of colour. And she's not expecting it, and it's about their life and their relationship, and it's about them trying to pull a life together, and also about their landlady who they live with, who rents out her whole house to black tenants and is hated on her street for doing so. So we follow the landlady's story, and we also get a section about the landlady's husband who is over in India and fighting over there as part of the armed forces. And this book is just filled with excellent commentary on race, on class, on sexism, but it's also such a warm, funny story filled with joy. And again, like Tayari Jones, Andrea Levy is excellent at giving you characters with all their flaws and saying to you, you know, who is wrong or right, who could possibly be wrong or right in this situation. It's impossible to place the blame. These people are in an awful situation and they're making the very best of it with the limited knowledge they have, and you get to watch that unfold. This is one of those books that I look at and think, this is the perfect example of a novel and what it can achieve. And it's one of those books that sort of makes lots of other novels pale in comparison. And that's why I'm so harsh with my 5 stars, because if books like this are possible, if somebody can craft something like this, how on earth can other things be put on the same pedestal? Because they're just not. So if you haven't read this book, like, what are you doing? It's been out for so many years and it's absolutely phenomenal. Like, it's flawless. Absolutely love it. But another book did beat it. I gave another book the first place, so, you know, this book is also fucking brilliant. The book that got my #1 spot, and if you've guessed, well done, is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. I don't know how anybody could read this book and not put it in their top books of the year. It is just a masterclass in writing. It's absolutely phenomenal. I listened to this on audio. Again, it was narrated by the author, which I loved. I'd highly recommend it on audio. But again, I do also want to own it in physical print, because if I'd read this, then it would be like filled with tabs. As with this one, if I'd read this one compared to listening on audio, there's so many moments of just perfect writing. So if you don't know, Chanel Miller is the woman who was known as Emily Doe during the Stanford rape case trial, and after the trial she decided to go public with her name, and she released this memoir that starts with the moment of her going out for the evening to have a good time with her sister and her sister's friend, and then moves into her waking up in hospital and not knowing what's happened to her after being sexually assaulted, and follows her through the subsequent years of dealing with that, the trial, and how she has tried as much as she possibly can to recover from that moment, and how it sort of stains everything in her life and all relationships. And this is just, it's perfect. It's absolutely flawless. And again, this is a masterclass in writing. Like, when I read books like this and Small Island, I just almost want to just cry at like every sentence, because the fact that somebody can write like that is phenomenal. The fact that no paragraph can feel like it just passes by, like every single word counts, every single word is perfectly placed, and on every page you can find something that's beautiful and powerful and means something. This is excellent, you know, as an exploration of how Chanel herself dealt with it, but also what her case did for other survivors of sexual assault is phenomenal. You know, obviously this book is filled with trigger warnings, you know, don't read this if you're going to be triggered by sexual assault, because that is discussed. But I will say that this book gives a voice to the voiceless. And this book really argues with the way we treat victims of sexual assault and the way we put all the weight on the victims. There's a point where she's, you know, in court during the trial, and she's being attacked by one of the lawyers, you know, asking her all these ridiculous questions about what did you eat and what time did you eat that, and then when did you sip that drink, and then when did you start another one, and when did you go to the toilet, and everything about her is being assessed down to, you know, the most minute detail. And she has this moment of clarity where she realises that, you know, as the victim, she is the one on trial. She is the one whose character is being torn to pieces. She is the one that has to answer to the court and answer to the public. And she really makes you question, you know, what sort of society are we if this is the way we deal with situations like this. So yeah, I highly recommend it. It's not, you know, it's obviously a hard read, but I found it really hopeful. I found it really inspiring and informative, and she's just a beautiful voice. I would highly recommend it. So it's got very dark in here, and I hope this isn't like, you know, awful lighting and really fuzzy. I'm sorry if it is, I can't be bothered to film this all over again. But yeah, I really had to sort of get my enthusiasm up to film this video, because whenever a video feels late, I feel like, oh god, I just can't be bothered to do it now. But as soon as I started talking about these books, I felt really enthused, and I feel like I could just like bin February off reading any other books and just reread all these, which would be a joyous thing. And I, you know, just on the topic of rereading, I do really think that reading a book once just isn't enough, because I feel like books are always better on a reread, because you can pinpoint moments, especially in fiction, when something happens, you know, something's dropped into the narrative which feels meaningless, but that has so much weight once you get to a later part in the book. And on a reread, those nuggets are phenomenal when you find them and realise that there was this hint or there was this moment that mattered that you didn't realise mattered. So yeah, you know, I just want to recommend all these books, but I also want to recommend rereading your favourite books from last year or the year before, because I think that rereading is absolutely wonderful, and I want to become somebody who just rereads all the fucking time. So yeah, that's the end of this video. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books or if you plan to read them after watching this video. I hope you feel enthused about all of these books because they're all glorious. And as always, please, please, please feel free to give me recommendations for other books like these ones, because, you know, I would love to read more books like this. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!